Welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday morning series. The amazing Kristin Snowden is joining today. She joins every other month on Wednesdays for the second Wednesday of the month. And so this is September already. I can't believe here we are in the year is flying by. And what do you have for us today?
Well, hi everyone. I'm gonna take a minute to, pin me. There we go. Okay, because I was trying to get this all situated. All right, let me get some tech stuff out of the way. Okay. Hi and welcome everyone. I want to pose a question to you. What happens when the pain and trauma of the betrayal that you've been through resurfaces at unexpected times?
Mm.
These are moments when you might be at a party and you witness two people inappropriately flirting with one another, or you're just watching a movie and then it starts involving addiction and infidelity. Or you might be out with a bunch of friends and you're hearing them start to discuss someone else's marital problems. These are all a few examples of maybe previously benign experiences, something that didn't bother you before. But now that you have been traumatized by uncovering your partner's betrayal, these are now events that can be extremely upsetting. There's a flood of emotions that often accompany these kind of trauma triggers that we're experiencing. And it can leave you feeling overwhelmed, broken, helpless, or just feeling like you are never going to be normal again. So, if you are navigating the crushing weight of betrayal trauma, the healing process can often feel never ending or impossible. Hi, my name is Kristin Snowden, and I'm a licensed therapist in California and life coach. And these webinars are dedicated to helping individuals and couples navigate extreme relationship crises. And this webinar is going to specifically focus on managing these unexpected trauma triggers that come up from previously benign experiences. And I'll try my best to provide you with real strategies to heal and rebuild resiliency once these trauma triggers surface. So let's start a little bit at the beginning. But again, I have so many videos on what is betrayal trauma, why it's so devastating to your body. It's more than just someone cheating or lying. It is trauma that is wired into your body and constantly shows up. But being betrayed by your trusted, intimate partner can be one of the most devastating experiences in your life. Whether it's a betrayal that occurs because of infidelity, uncovering addictions, pornography use, substance abuse, financial lies, or any other forms of betrayal and emotional trauma, these can all paralyze you and leave you wondering when you are ever going to feel human again. Betrayal by the one that you trusted the most leaves your brain splitting into multiple parts as you're trying to reconcile the person that loved me the most has now harmed me the most and is everything, not just my betrayer, but everyone and everything untrustworthy, unsafe. And again, it's previously benign environments are now very scary, uncertain, and it can even feel dangerous to you and your nervous system. So, even in the best of circumstances, if you uncovered your partner's betrayal and you have now both gone down the path of recovery and you're both in better places, there is still a traumatic residue that is burned into your brain and body. It can leave you feeling uncomfortable in your own skin as you have to navigate unwelcomed flashbacks, bursts of anger or sadness, a state of constant hypervigilance, or even perseveration around cheating, lying, your partner, your partner's behaviors, etc. Events and environments that previously felt very neutral and non-triggering can now feel like landmines. That party that you're attending, that friendly conversation that you're having, the TV show, the restaurant, that song that's on the radio. We really have to do some extra work to learn how to navigate these landmines. You are not alone. So let's understand why these relatively benign experiences are now coming out of our body as something that's very overwhelming and triggering. Again, I've talked about betrayal trauma and how it wires deeply in our brain and body. But essentially, when you're watching those people flirt inappropriately, it's not about what's going on for them. It's the trauma triggers that are resurfacing from the wiring in your brain that are queuing up these experiences in your body that say, this is dangerous, this is deeply painful, this is creating a sense of uncertainty and a vulnerability that's very upsetting to my body. So again, if you want more details about why neutral events are triggering, I'd encourage you to watch one of my videos like on what betrayal trauma does to your brain and body, or how the nervous system is how the autonomic nervous system is impacted by your trauma. I want you to understand that when you're watching these events, when you're in these moments, it's not about the moment itself, what's going on right in front of you. I mean, maybe it is. You might have here and now feelings, but it's more about the feelings of unsafety that you have stored in your brain related to infidelity, addiction, manipulation, lying, someone acting a certain way to someone's face and then behaving a different way behind your back. These are all wired in to your survival system that are saying, this is all dangerous. People are all dangerous, and I don't know how to keep myself safe. And that's going to be a theme that we're going to talk about in this webinar, is that the big story underneath it all is I don't know how to keep myself safe. And so the big question is figuring out ways that you can try to re-invite moments of safety, glimmers of safety, to kind of ground yourself and downregulate in the moment. So this is in the moment trauma treatment responses, trauma trigger responses. Now, the best tools I have learned to use for in the moment downregulation for triggering is something I've covered often, which is the polyvagal theory, using down regulation menu items that I have on my website, kristinsnowden.com. And again, in multiple videos about what betrayal trauma does to your body, how it's wired, why it is traumatic, and all those kind of topics. So I'm going to leave you to go research that and listen to those topics. But the other on the spot trauma trigger interventions that I like is parts work. We can call them many different names. There's internal family systems by Dick Schwartz. There's wounded child work, parts work, whatever the terms are that you want to use. But it's essentially giving in the moment triggers all the time and voices and opportunities to share what's going on inside me. What are the stories that are coming up for me that are upsetting me, that feel scared, that have hurt and pain in their story, that need validation that bad things happen, and also they need to learn, what are you doing differently to keep me safe? So internal family systems, parts work, this is all a really great structured system that I like. It's got kind of this very tangible list of to-do items. When I feel triggered, I ask these questions, I go down this path. And so I find it's very accessible when we are in a trauma response. So let's talk about that. All right, let's start first with a little bit of internal family systems 101. So Dick Schwartz, Dr. Richard Schwartz is the one who is probably most famous for talking about this parts work. He calls it internal family systems. And he says, within us, we have all these things that are called exiles. I don't like the term exiles. What I like is their shame voices. Again, I have a million videos on shame, why we have it, where it comes from, how to learn about it. But we are all wired to have shame stories that they essentially come down to, I'm not enough, I don't know how to protect myself. This world is too scary. I can't get my needs met. If people really knew me, they wouldn't love me. These are all these deep, deep shame voices. He calls them exiles, and they surface, they are at a core of a lot of ways that we show up or don't show up in life. And again, look up my shame videos on YouTube and you'll find out a lot more on that topic. The other elements that we have going on in the background are what we call our protectors or managers, and he even calls them firefighters. These are the systems that show up in our body, our personality traits, parts of ourselves to manage our daily discomfort in life. Freud would call them our defense mechanisms, right? How we rationalize and minimize. Uh, Dick Schwartz calls them our protectors and managers. So when things get uncomfortable, when things get scary, we'll show up with our perfectionist part, our shutdown, don't talk part, our part that gets loud and says, you don't get to mess with me, and kind of fights and pushes back, a part that might feel in shame, and so they shame other people. These are all protector manager parts that show up to kind of just keep us living, keep us surviving. Then the other big element in the internal family systems model is talking about self. Now he talks about self with a capital S. And this is, again, this is really hard stuff, at least when I was learning about it, for me to get. But it's this idea of there's this core sense of who you are, who you want to be, what you want, how you want to show up in this world. You can call it a bunch of different things. Your value system, kind of when you are fully integrated, what does that look like? He calls it the 8 C's. There's this sense of calmness, curiosity, confidence, compassion, courage, clarity, creativity, connectedness. I will talk about this a little bit more, but the best way I have learned to personify myself is to picture myself as the CEO heading up a huge conference table, and my employees are all my wounded children, my protector parts, the parts of me that want to show up in one way, the other parts that, my relational parts that love my family and love my job and want to be great at things. They're just all sitting at the conference table. They all have different things going on in their life, but we all have one vested interest, which is this company that's called Kristin. And there has to be a leader at the front of the company that makes the final decisions, that takes everybody's input in, but makes the final call and says, look, I'm steering this ship. This is where it has to go. And that, to me, is how I've learned to understand sense of self. The CEO of my company, while all my employees are my parts. So again, I like this internal family systems approach in the moment trauma trigger moments, because it's very tangible. So when I feel myself being triggered, I'm at that party and I see people flirting, I can and I feel myself getting really uncomfortable and I want to run for the door and I want to shut down or I want to start drinking, whatever. It's a list of things to do to just kind of stop, look, and listen and move through that triggering event. So Dr. Schwartz calls it the 6 F's. Again, it's find, focus, flesh out, feel toward, befriend, and fear. I'm not a fan of those. Um, I like it better to kind of talk about in terms of, let's say there's like 6 steps. And first, it's when I'm in this moment, and let's use as a practical application, I am sitting in that party and I'm with friends, but then I look across and I see 2 people who I know who are married to different people just being inappropriate. They're standing too close to each other. They just are giving off vibes that look not good to me, just inappropriate. So, first, you notice the trigger, pause and figure out, okay, I'm reacting. That's it. That's that find part. What's going on in my body? Where am I feeling it? The other big part is to tell yourself, you literally have to tell yourself, this is just a part of me that is being triggered. because I have a lot of different parts going on right now. There's a part of me that's happy to be at this party and seeing some old friends. There's a part of me that feels a little nervous about being out and about again. There's a part of me that's, you know, happy to be celebrating another event. But then there's also this part that's seeing this thing in front of me and it's triggering lots of feelings in me. It's a part of you. It is not all of you. That's one of the biggest things I take away from parts work is to always separate it out. This is a part of me, not all of me. So we notice, we separate, and then we name. Let's give a voice to this part, but it's also going to be parts. When you're watching this happen, there's going to be lots of employees standing up at the conference table having lots of things to say about what you're seeing. So this part might feel anxious when you're watching this happen. There's a part of you that might get really angry and rageful that people do this. There's a part that might feel pathetic that maybe at one point I was that person in the background that was the wife of that husband that's been getting while he's out there flirting in such a public way. So notice these different parts that are kind of coming up, resurfacing, and kind of screaming out to you. Another big step is to ask yourself, how do you feel towards these reactions? How do you feel towards these parts? This is a really important step because this is kind of an invitation for the CEO to start standing up in front of the conference table. If you're noticing all these parts getting triggered and kind of yelling at the conference table, notice, are you judging them? Are you pushing back at them? Are you really angry that they feel so anxious and they're ruining your party, or that you feel so much rage and cynicism? And I just didn't used to be so cynical and rageful, and I'm so upset at myself that now this party's ruined. I want to run away. Notice how you are feeling towards those parts. Because Dick Schwartz says you're not going to be very productive at exploring these wounded parts of you if you are angry at them, if you hate them, if you're trying to just make them go away. He says, invite them in. Ask that anger towards those parts to just kind of step aside and be curious, right? That's part of the eight C's, right? Curiosity, compassion, clarity, calmness, confidence. You're asking, you want to learn more about these parts, right? Again, I'm a CEO, I have to run this company, but these humans with these thoughts and feelings and experiences in life, they all are part of the cogs of my company's system, and I need to know what's going on, each and every one of them. They all have a voice. So once I can kind of push aside get out of here, stop judging those parts, stop being angry at those parts, and inviting them in, because let's find out why they're here. Maybe they're trying to protect me. Maybe they're trying to help me remember something or learn something. You want to nurture them, right? You listen to what they're saying. You hear all of their concerns, all their stories, all their fears. And that's kind of where you learn this carousel of just letting all the stories whip around. Now, I'm going to skip ahead and say, while these stories are kind of carouseling in your head, you're going to want to incorporate some down regulation interventions. And again, I have a whole list of menu items to choose from and do trial and error with to see what works. But deep breathing is always my go-to. Now, you've heard everyone's stories. It's time to kind of negotiate. You're at a party, you're not leaving the party, you enjoy parts of this party. You may not be enjoying watching what's happening over there in the living room with those two inappropriate people, but there is a part of you that wants to enjoy other elements of the party. So you, as the CEO, you start negotiating with these parts. Okay, everyone, we can't leave right now, but what do you need to feel safe? How can I help you feel safe? Do I need to update you? Do I need to remind you that right now this feels really gross to watch this, but you're in a different place. You know so much more than you knew before. These are elements of seeking safety, right? You are trying to figure out what these agitated, triggered parts in you need to feel safe. So sometimes you need to update it with maybe information it's forgotten. You need to resource it with downregulation techniques. So really to quickly summarize, you're in this triggered moment. You feel blindsided by being flooded by all these emotions. And stop, look, and listen to do 6 things. Notice what's going on. Separate it out that this is a part of me. This is a triggered part of me. It's not all of me. Name it. What is going on? What are the feelings? Where do I feel it in my body? Nurture it. How do I feel towards this part? If it's anger and judgment, see if that can step aside so you can learn more about it, what's going on. Step up as the CEO and start learning and talking to it, getting more information from it. Then move to negotiate. What do we need to feel safe? And then the safety seeking. What can we do here and now? Let's resource, let's update, let's figure out as a team how we need to move forward if we're going to stay at this party. And that's a quick summary of the parts work. Now, I'm going to caveat this and let you know these are here and now in the moment trigger these are here and now in the moment trauma trigger interventions. However, these interventions will be much more productive that when you have more time separate from the party, when you go home or when you're with your therapist or when you're driving in a car and it's quiet and you have some time, the more time you spend with these parts where you let them tell their story, you let them show their memories, you validate their experience, you let them express their hurt or anger or fears, you journal on all of these, you will notice that these parts become much more predictable, right?
Mm.
They don't blindside you anymore. That like you're at a party and you see this in front of you and you start feeling anxious or disgusted or rageful. You go, oh yeah, there's that part of me that gets really rageful when I see this. I know this part. This is the part that knows that if I stay mad and enraged, then I am not going to feel vulnerable to scary stuff sideswiping and blindsiding me and knocking me down again. My rage is my power. And so that's just that part that's just trying to step in to make me feel powerful in a very scary, uncertain moment. And so I know that part. I can thank it for stepping up and helping me in times where I needed it. But I can also say, hey, you know what? I'm the CEO. I know so much more than I did before. And I got this. Like, I am not, I didn't even know what I didn't even know back then. And so these are the things that I've been doing to keep us safe. I keep myself around a bunch of professionals, and I'm in a betrayed partners group where I'm constantly talking about this. I have boundaries that I've set. Maybe my partner is in recovery and is working towards X, Y, and Z. But these are all discussions that I actually have with my inside parts to help downregulate them and remind them, I got this. Because again, ultimately, they are just going to want to know that you are learning the skills to try your best to keep them safe. Another thing that you want to do as you start learning about these parts is start asking them, if you weren't constantly trying to make me feel anxious or constantly stirring up anger or resentment or telling me I'm pathetic for staying in this marriage, what would you rather be doing? You know what? And sometimes the answer is it's really interesting. These parts have different stories. I'd rather be walking on the beach. I'd rather be spending time with my kids. I'd rather be doing this really bold, scary thing, which is reconnecting with my partner, or maybe even getting to know him or her, though that is very scary because I'm curious, right? It's really interesting that when you are not in these triggering events, in these moments where you are immediately triggered and you have to kind of work through them in a short-term way, but you have longer term periods of time where you can explore these deeper. Those are really great questions to be asking yourself. What is the part trying to do to protect you? What is it trying to manage? These are great questions that I would love for you to start journaling on. All right, so let's also talk about Additional complementary therapeutic interventions that you can do to manage these triggers in the moment. Any kind of somatic body grounding is probably one of your most accessible, easy things to do because essentially, again, your survival brain is loosely associating these people flirting equals danger for me. And so my survival brain is triggered. And what I need to do is add a little bit more time, oxygen, and blood flow to my brain to move it from lizard scared brain to this is who I am, prefrontal cortex. I'm going to think about consequences. I'm going to be able to assess my level of safety. You know, that might look dangerous, but am I actually in actual danger? What's going on? And so the most accessible is the deep breathing. And again, there's lots of people who will say there can just be the box breathing, the 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. There's a few other people that believe you do two big deep breaths and then one slow out breath. So, and that will trigger your parasympathetic system and slow your heart rate down and slow things down. Other great things to do are to do actual physical body scans. I feel anxious. We'll hone in on it. I feel it in my chest. It feels like I'm having a heart attack. I feel the tightness. I feel spinning thoughts in my head. And then you can also do grounding by looking around in the room to bring yourself back in. So if you're sitting in a chair, you might feel yourself sitting in the chair, or you start naming things you see in the room. You'll hear me say this a million times, but my quick go-tos are counting backwards from 100 by 7, naming 3 girls' names that start with B, 4 boys' names that start with M. These are just things where you essentially are trying to distract that survival lizard brain enough to hopefully turn on this executive brain to get it back to functioning. A few other go-to interventions can be what we call cognitive reframing, which is reality check this. Again, this is what's going on over here. It is not going on in my life. This is reminding me of my story, but it's not really my story. Replace catastrophic thoughts with maybe compassionate truths. That's really terrible. That's happening, but I'm going to love myself. I'm going to love other people, whatever these stories are. Resourcing and anchoring. So EMDR has a lot of resourcing and anchoring tools. They do like creating safe space, safe place visualizations. They use like bilateral tapping, tapping on your arms. I like the butterfly tapping. I think it's very accessible. Or tapping on the legs. They're squeezing things, fidget spinners, things like that. And then self-compassionate practices. In addition to really learning your parts, I think it's extremely beneficial to take time to come up with a few compassionate affirmations for yourself, your go-to stories. One of my big ones, because I'm really hard on myself or I'm a perfectionist and I perform and I fall short, is often, I didn't know what I didn't know back then, but I'm constantly learning. Now that I know, I try to do better and I try to surround myself with other people to keep me accountable and keep this growth process structured. So I find these go-to things. So it could be today I'm safe. Today I'm healing myself or trying to heal my marriage. I don't know if my partner's ever going to relapse, but today he or she is doing his best. And then there's also self-soothing techniques that you can use. Maybe you need to remove yourself for a moment from the environment. Maybe you need to go for a walk. Maybe you need to go breathe some air. Maybe you need to turn towards a friend, redirect the conversation, whatever it is. But the more you drill these things, the more accessible they will become in moment, these moments of being triggered and overwhelmed and flooded by these extreme emotions. So a really great thing that I'd also suggest is you can look back at all these things that have been triggering to you. These come up in betrayal trauma groups all the time when I'm running my betrayal trauma groups. And when you notice these things are triggering to you, you can start preparing yourself, start understanding the stories that you're telling yourself in these moments. A really powerful betrayed partners group we did recently is based on some of these examples. And the stories these women came up with is watching these two people flirting inappropriately. They started accessing so many stories of like, gosh, it's making me feel like, how didn't I notice it in my own marriage before? Does everybody, if everyone's watching this, did everyone
Mhm.
watch that stuff happen in my own life? Oh my gosh, I'm so pathetic for sticking around. What am I thinking? Or I was pathetic for hanging in there for as long as I did. How will I ever know if my partner's done this, will do this again? Gosh, marriage is BS. I don't ever want to make myself vulnerable to anyone ever again. People who do this are disgusting and despicable, and I hate them. So, again, when we're saying these statements, they sound like it's all of me. Like all of me feels all these things. But I really think it's powerful to sit down and, again, picture all these people standing up individually at my conference table having each one of these stories because they have real trauma behind each one of these statements and saying, oh, yeah, that's that part that's so mad at me for exposing myself to this kind of hurt and pain and trauma. But we've talked and it knows, like, I didn't even know what I didn't even know. My partner was highly invested in lying and manipulating and gaslighting me. And that's why I didn't know. But guess what? Here's some updated information. That is not the case anymore. I know now what's going on. I have read so many books and watched so many podcasts, and now I'm in a betrayed partners group every week. And I'm with a therapist who's very well versed in helping me navigate this crisis. I am so different today than that part that got bamboozled back then. And that updating part and that process is so important to ignite further healing. So please, when you have more time and you notice these triggering events and these triggering stories, yes, do comment in that moment. But it's not over once you calm down. You got to take these moments into your therapist's office, sit down with a journal, and start really spending time with all these different parts. The more time you spend with these parts, the more work you do with these parts, the more they will become passing stories in your body. So when you go to these parties, when you see that movie, when that song pops up, when the anniversary comes, it's kind of more like just an expected event. Oh, yes, old friend, I remember you, anxiety part, or super rageful, angry part, or perfectionist performance part. I know them all. I'm very familiar with them. So they do not blindside me anymore. I'm not shocked when they show up and start screaming at my CEO company table. I just can go, okay, let's not judge this. You're trying to manage something. Something does not feel right and does not feel safe to you. What's going on for you? And then me as the CEO, I can resource it. I can update that part. We negotiate and we seek safety and figure out how to move through it together. And with that said, I'm just going to remind everybody that I have a Betrayed Partners group starting September 30th. So in a couple weeks, I have 5 spots left. These usually do sell out. So if you're interested, come to kristinsnowden.com and click on live workshops. But that's a really great place where you kind of can start talking about these parts, exploring them with other group members and learn how to move through it. One of my favorite sayings is pain that is not transformed is instead transmitted. And that is what a lot of this parts work, shame resiliency work, trauma work can do is help you understand, but then still transcend the traumatic wiring that you've been exposed to because of your betrayal. And now I'm ready for questions.
Good, because you have a lot, but I just like I have this visual. I love the visual of the CEO of the company, and I can imagine when you're first starting this that everybody's standing up and leaning into the table and screaming and yelling. But the more work you do, now there's a meeting and they're raising their hands and going, "Hey, I'm here," and you're able to go, "Yes, I'm acknowledging you," and like it can
Right.
calm everything down because you're able to stay in your executive brain. I did throw a couple of resources in I put Kristen's website in, but also we do have IFS parts work drop-in groups, a separate one for the for men, for addict men, and then a separate one for female partners. Those are free drop-in groups on our site. That's the, that's a focus. And then Dr. Eddie, Kristen mentioned the inner child, and Dr. Eddie's doing a special edition webinar on September 22nd. It does require pre-registration. I put the link in the chat. There's a small fee for that particular one. It's not going to be recorded, so you won't be able to watch it later. I hope you'll consider joining that as well. So I, I don't think we'll get through the questions if I ask you questions. So we're going to just ask these. My husband left today for Troy Love's retreat, Finding Peace. Great. It is co-ed. What should feel safe for me? The retreat now feels threatening. My husband was drawn to and had sex with damaged women. Swimming suits were also included in his packing list. I now feel my husband will be around damaged women in bikinis. How do I get through the next 4 days while he tries to find peace? I've attended Troy's retreat, so I can talk to that, but I would like you to talk to her specifically about her feelings.
Yeah, my feelings are you are not alone, and those are completely understandable responses. Again, speaking of parts, part of you is probably like, thank God he's willing to go out and do this work. I am I excitedly anticipate what kind of man is going to come back having learned all these new skills. And then a part of me is like, what co-ed, what bathing suits, what, the wounded children in you are like, I know my partner's MO. It feels really unsafe. And so the first thing is, do not judge or get angry or push back on those parts. They are 100% legitimate. They have their place in space. And then you need to start negotiating both internally with yourself, how to help those parts stay safe. But part of those negotiations and seeking safety is going to be through conversations and boundary setting with your partner. For instance, I think Tammy is going to really help you provide you insight about how these retreats go and what they look like. But you have every right to say, hey, so many parts of me are triggered by the fact that it's co-ed, that you're packing a bathing suit, that you're going to be around a bunch of damaged women. That's fair enough to be concerned about that. And we need to go negotiate about how you can help me feel safe while you go and do this work. Go ahead, Tammy.
So, and the retreat I attended was mixed gender, and there was a bunch of damaged people. We were all there on various places, and I know Troy really well. He holds this space. He does it with integrity. Could somebody do something nefarious? Absolutely, but that would. I think that would be a pretty obvious thing. It is not, I just don't see that, I hear I'm not invalidating, and I can understand the swimsuit and everything. I've shared this before on webinars, like treatment centers, women are not allowed to wear sandals because feet can be triggering. And I'm like, but people are going to see feet, everywhere. So at some point, if something is, coming up, or, that's an opportunity to work through. And so I hope he uses it. It was an amazing experience for me. I owned some things that, like, I didn't like. I knew I had some, I knew I had some wounds and things, and there were a couple things I didn't really want to take ownership of, but it gave me the opportunity. It didn't make me. It gave me the opportunity to really, look what was going on, and I've used that information, in a positive way. Everybody who shows up, is damaged. We're all damaged on some level there, and there's a lot of, betrayed partners that come to those, and have been wounded in relationships, but the space is really held, for it to be a safe space. So I hope you get support in this, and I love, pay attention to those, and I 100% validate. You have every right to be concerned. He has shown you everything that he has been willing to do, that wasn't good, but he's also, on the flip side of it, he's also doing something that could really help him move his, recovery journey forward. So, you know what? and you've got no control over him in that. So what you're doing today to take care of you while he's gone, I honor that, there's retreats, like the Troys are open to betrayed partners. That may be something in your future that you'd like to pursue too, because all those wounds are real. So, okay. Um, Addict betrayer here, 1 year in recovery. On a previous podcast episode, Kristen, you talked about shame and moving through and beyond shame. This specific topic of unexpected and unplanned trauma triggers came up in my relationship. The triggers hit a wound in my partner, and then my shame wounds get triggered when she gets angry, upset, hurt by the random trigger and the response she feels from it. How can anyone move on from these events that show up but cause similar latent feelings that when activate trauma in both my partner and myself? In theory, it sounds great, but in practice, these things never go away. The feelings never go away, and
Mhm.
they just settle down until reactivated.
Such a good question. And my response is definitely going to be easier said than done because it really is a practice. Remember, shame is not curable. Shame, or again, these exiles, these I'm not enough, I'm bad, I'm wrong, they are going to constantly be creeping in at any given moment. But I always start by saying shame is like a prosecutor trying to convict you of being a crappy human. So the more evidence you give it, the more powerful its case is going to be. So shame will rear its ugly head all the time, especially like what I'm picturing when you're telling me your story is your wife gets angry, gets upset by something that, again, some loose association, like one of the examples I gave that has nothing to do with you and your marriage. So her loose association and her trauma brain is extremely triggered and flared up, and she's feeling unsafe and out of control, and all these normal things that happen. So first and foremost, she has a responsibility to try to manage her trauma triggers. I always say what happened to you was not your fault, but now that you've been traumatized, for better or worse, it is now your responsibility to try to work through these trauma triggers and do your best to down regulate them as time goes by. So as time goes by, the charge and the physical flooding that occurs can dissipate a little. But on your end, every time your partner gets upset, it brings up all these I'm bad, I'm wrong, she's never going to get over this, I'm always going to be the bad guy. I will say for people in recovery, and I would love to hear from you, Tammy, about this, but the less evidence you give the prosecution by living in alignment, by staying in integrity, by being impeccable with your word, by having boundaries, following through with them, by going to these meetings, being of service to other people, it is really easy to kind of shut that prosecution voice down and say, hey, you ain't got no evidence. So I know you always have a chair at my company where you rear your ugly head and you say, oh, she's mad. You know why she's mad? Because you're bad. You do bad things and you do unlovable things. If you're standing up at that CEO position and you now have so much evidence of all the hard work you've done, that you have stayed in recovery, that you're of service to other people, all these things of the 12 steps are so great about helping people have accountability around. You should have the skills to start shutting down those shame stories or at least starting to negotiate with them. I know that was the old me. This is the new me. So it's two sides, right? It's partly your partner working on her betrayal trauma, trying to lower the level and intensity when she's feeling triggered and what she says and what she does. Then there's also putting a voice to it. When you get mad at me, the story I tell myself is I'm bad, I'm wrong, you're never going to forgive me, we're never going to be happy again. And then these can become very tangible, very powerful conversations that you and your partner can have that can create potential real healing. And then there's that internal work within yourself where you work really hard to stay in integrity, to give that prosecution less evidence that you are bad. And so you can more quickly, theoretically, move through those shame stories.
Yeah, I ditto everything, Kristen just said. And I I had to learn that my behaviors were bad. I did things that were bad, and I hardly ever use good and bad because it feels so moralistic, but I did
Right.
things that I'm not proud of, in my active addiction. That does not make me bad. My voice that I know immediately is an issue is if I am saying, oh, I'm such an idiot, I go, oh, wait, no, I'm not an idiot. That was not my finest moment. I can quickly, move through those. And Kristen was just talking about talk about it when you're not in this is going to happen again. You know that. So when you're not in this moment, say, this is the pattern we're doing. I wonder if we could do some co-regulation. Let's, can we find, some breathing things, to do together and do a little bit of that? Because I want to hear what you're saying and I don't want to go to my defensive shame place, so can we try something different? And if that one doesn't work so great, try something else, but then you're showing up and going like, I want to be there. I don't want to fall into my shame pit. I'm still vulnerable to that, but I literally can, I'll do the holding us, holding my hands out like I'm like there's a bowl and I'm going to receive this here. I'm not a sponge. I'm not going to take that in. I'm going to hear them and I can acknowledge and go, gosh, I can understand, how that would be triggering. But I love co-regulation because it's like, okay, we're going to do mine's the 4-7-8 breathing because the Navy SEALs do that one too. And the heart surgeons recommend that. But the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things I see. I mean, there's all kinds of things, or just taking a space, journaling about like, let's journal about this, and then coming back and talking about it. But yes, it's up to me to regulate me, and it's up to my partner to regulate. But I can do some things that can, if I'm not escalating it, that will help bring the temperature down. If I can stay in my if CEO brain instead. So, but yeah, the other thing you mentioned is the never. It will never go away. Um, I had to learn pretty early in my recovery that always nevers, forevers were they were not helpful in my, because that's a hopeless thing. And I'm going, they're not gone yet. They may never completely go away, but I also have the opportunity to make progress towards those. And I do not, I do not go right to the shame thing, like I used to. So with more practice, I can affirm, for you that, change is possible and you don't have to go and stay, spend any time in those those deep pits. So okay, I'm the betrayer. We are over 5 years into this. My wife is still having a lot of PTSD. We have had 6 to 9 peaceful months. We had a major meltdown this weekend that was unexpected. I traveled to see my mom and sister all day. I came back by 9:30 and I had my location tracking on my phone. She encouraged me multiple times to stay the night and update her. Multiple times I indicated I would not likely stay overnight and come home. I texted at 7 p.m. that I was driving home. I got home at 9:30 and she was triggered and upset. We went to bed after some apologies on my side. The next morning, she recounted it all and I did the AVR and tried to be accountable. I wasn't defensive. Things got worse. She began and with name calling, yelling, and belittling, shaming statements. We are both doing our work, a lot of it. She is not doing trauma work or individual therapy. I'm doing both with the CSAT and EMDR therapist. She's in COSA and does her work there. Her work is overwhelming and she feels her bandwidth is exceeded there.
Well, I think there's a specific reason why you mentioned that she is not doing trauma work or individual therapy. I think you have feelings about that. And I think there needs to be a discussion about that. I might be jumping to conclusions, but when you're telling me your story, I'm hearing that my partner's trauma triggers and trauma reactions feel really big still, considering that we're 5 years into this. And I'm wondering if it is due to lack of trauma work, trauma rewiring, EMDR, somatic experiencing type of things. Um, and that I'm wondering too from your sentence about her bandwidth is exceeded, if COSA now is something that leaves her more emotionally exposed, more emotionally flooded. Now, you're doing your work, you're keeping your side of the street clean. All you can do is ask these questions of your partner and explore these topics. Again, in the best way you can without trying to get defensive of, I'm curious, I'm wondering, I'm seeing these things. I've benefited in X, Y, and Z ways from EMDR or CSAT. I'm wondering if you would benefit from those things as well. The other thing I want to point out from your story is that we've had 6 to 9 peaceful months. That's actually incredible. So I'm sure this one night can feel overwhelming and like you're never going to get through this, but pulling together 6 to 9 peaceful months, it's pretty great considering. So again, speaking of parts, right? There's parts. You're at the CEO and we want to celebrate, 6 to 9 months, no accidents on site, like yay. But then here's some parts where I'm still seeing that we need to do some improvements, some opportunities for growth. What does everyone think? Maybe we need to have some individual conferences with all of you, because we're still not operating at the level that I was really hoping to, and it's feeling overwhelming and like this isn't going to get any better. So it sounds like you're doing great work, and so is she, but it sounds like it's time to kind of do a state of the company kind of assessment between you and your partner and see what else needs to be done.
And I maybe I missed it, but I don't hear that you're doing couples therapy.
Right.
And at this point, like maybe someone who could help, like again, I love what Kristen said, 6 to 9 months, that's great. Okay, so we have some encouraging things, how can we build on those? Rather than going, oh, I give up. But maybe a couples therapist. Here's some things that we were doing well that worked, for 6 to 9 months. And now, how can we, optimize that? Okay. When I have a trigger and share it with my husband, does he have the opportunity to correct me if the information behind the trigger is inaccurate? For example, I thought my husband acted out in Austria with his affair partner, but it was actually Brussels. Does he get to share the side of the story about the
Um,
trigger, or does that dismiss
I
my
mean,
trigger?
he gets to do whatever he wants. Is it helpful or productive? I don't know about that. Look, your experience, the stories you tell yourself, the fears you have, those cannot be taken away from you. So when you are stating, I'm watching those two people flirt inappropriately, um, I don't like it, and someone says, "Oh, well, they're just really unhappy in their marriages, so it's not that big of a deal." Or, "No, they're just friends and coworkers. It's not that big of a deal." It doesn't matter what the side story is. Your body and your nervous system is seeing that, and it's creating lots of uncomfortable, scary, dangerous, unsafe, whatever the words are for it, panicky, anxious stories in your body. And that is what you're trying to surface. That is what you're trying to negotiate with. That's what you're trying to resource to calm down. And that is what you're trying to seek safety around. So, again, I always talk about there's the content of the problem, right? Did he have an affair in Austria or Brussels? And then there's the context of the problem, which is the bigger underneath story. And that's what couples need to work on, especially when they're repairing post betrayal trauma. It's not about with whom or how many times. Yes, we do care about those details. I understand, because understanding those stories helps us make things more tangible. And I know what's happening then. But the content is there's cheating. I'm triggered by it. I'm scared. I think you're going to do it again. I need to know you're a different person. I need to know, why you did these horrible things and that you're not going to do them again. And tell me all the ways that you've learned how you're not going to do them again. That's what these conversations are for, and that's what I'm seeking. And that's the most important thing. So, yes, I'd say it's unproductive, dear husband, for you to correct me on factual information, because all my nervous system feels is this is triggering. I'm upset. I feel unsafe. Can you please help me feel safer?
I hope your husband watches this. I'm with Kristen. You heard me catch when I was reading that. He's missing the point. If he's correcting on a detail like that, he still had an affair. He had his affair partner in a foreign country, and other than geography, it doesn't matter. And he's missing the point that you're trying to share with him something that is hugely problematic, and all he's looking at is to make sure, I mean, this is a formal therapeutic disclosure. Like, even with those details, it's like, if you're going like, no, it wasn't there, it was here. who cares? At some point, it's like, yes, I take ownership that I had an affair. I had my affair partner in a foreign country. I can only imagine how hurtful that is for you. And then my focus is on you, not on like, oh no, you got the details wrong. If he's looking to build a bridge and come closer towards you, this is not it. So, okay, next question.
The next question I think is a follow-up from
Oh,
the other one where he was talking about how they try to repair. Um,
okay,
he's just kind of listing all the things that he tried to do,
okay.
taking timeouts during this really heated conflict. That there's a set aside quiet space, and she would follow him into that quiet space. Essentially, there's just a long list of things that you are saying in this narrative that's saying, I tried all these things, I used all these skills, I fell back on my drilling for how to downregulate and lower the intensity of this disagreement. And you are saying in this that you don't feel like she was mutually respecting those kind of boundaries. So again, this just goes back to I am hearing from your story that you're feeling like you're keeping your side of the street clean, trying to manage your triggers, stay aligned with your boundaries, trying to down regulate highly conflictual adversarial moments, and you don't feel like she is keeping her side of the street clean. Um, this should be talked about. I think Tammy was talking about you may not be in couples therapy. Maybe it's time to have a couples sessions to discuss this because it sounds like it's not working for you anymore.
Well, and it says we're in home separation for 3 days. um like, do you have a plan? Like, we've done some really good webinars. Dr. Stevie Hall and Lindsay Stanley have a workbook on navigating a therapeutic separation, and there's a whole plan of agreed upon things. It's not just like we're staying in separate bedrooms or whatever. So having a plan that is agreed to, that identifies the boundaries for everyone, could be useful. You can view that, and Dr. Rob did a podcast on sex, love, and addiction with them as well. But check those resources out. Okay. I get triggered by comments by SA partner makes about actresses when we are watching TV, especially during a nude sex scene, and I find myself in a freeze, fear response, or I make a snarky remark. Should I have my response up my sleeve for whenever it comes up? And what should I say? That's a great question. And I know that happens often.
Yeah, it happens often. These things are very triggering and they come on and like sideswipe you. And so yes, I think that it is best to rehearse um something like that for, right? I always say it's like the military. You drill, drill, drill. So when you are in this chaotic crisis, fearful, lack of safety moment, you fall back on your training, you fall back on these sound bites. So, yes, when there's not triggering, if you are going to couples therapy or you can have conversations, I would love for you to say, hey, just as a side, when we are watching these shows, like I already, when I go into TV shows with you, I get really anxious and I go, oh God, what kind of thing is going to pop up on these shows that's going to trigger bad flashbacks, bad memories, and then just ruin my night? So that's already something that I'm dealing with. But then on top of it, you make commentary about these actresses, or we even sit through nude scenes, which makes me feel very uncomfortable. um, we need to negotiate safety in these situations. I don't feel safe. I don't like it. The story I tell myself is you're just kind of getting off watching these scenes, and I'm not even sitting next to my partner anymore. I'm sitting next to a guy who's getting high watching these shows. And that creates fear in me. It makes me feel gross for sitting next to you while you're doing this. Whatever, you have to do this work so that you can explain it to him and help him understand what's going on. And then you resource and negotiate and figure out with your partner how to navigate these moments in a more safe way.
Okay. Yeah. And this is another one that comes up often. I get triggered and anxious seeing a vehicle, which is a rogue model. It has to do with my husband's evil business manager and financial infidelity. How do I get it out of my head? And take away the evil business manager and all that, but the specific, like a rogue or a location or a whatever, like when there is something that is and a rogue is going to be driving down the road and you're going to see it and it could, could come off the highway exit. So, yeah, like how do you focus on that specific?
Right. Asking the question, how do I get it out of my head or out of my body is not the correct question anymore. Okay, because again, I talked about, remember, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So my trauma trigger shows up, I see a rogue and I think I'm feeling feelings of unsafety. How could I be bamboozled? Oh my gosh, people are so scary. I can't believe there's evil people out there that do this kind of stuff. The more you push back on it and say, ew, gross stories, I don't like you, I don't want to be reminded by these stupid cars anymore, the more you judge those feelings of unsafety and fear and uncertainty, the worse it's going to be. So my whole point is, if you can spend more time with these parts that are being triggered, spend more time understanding why they get so freaked out. What's going on when you see a rogue? What kind of feelings come up for you? What are the feelings of unsafety? And then are there ways to help you update that part so it can feel safe again? All the things that are different now compared to back then, how you're keeping yourself safe and protected, how there are scary people out there, but now you have incredible skills to figure out how to navigate those situations. Those are all, it's not getting it out of your head. It's understanding that it's present and negotiating with it and figuring out a safety plan around it.
Uh, time for one more, or
Sure.
okay. Can you speak on turning a manager or firefighter into a cheerleader, please?
Um, well, that's what Dick Schwartz essentially says, is that these firefighters and managers, he calls one of his books on IFS, it's called No Bad Parts. Firefighters are often, by the way, like the addict part. It's the part that's like so overwhelmed with my shame voices, so overwhelmed with life and feelings and emotions and who I am, and I can't show myself. And if everyone knew me, they wouldn't love me. So I numb myself out, or I seek intensity, or I create chaos elsewhere to keep myself out of my body. Those are the firefighters. Now, it's not about turning them into cheerleaders. It's understanding what the real reason is for why they existed in the first place. What are they trying to help you escape? What are they trying to help you to numb out? And what are those stories? You need to get to know those exile stories. And then you need to hear their stories about their trauma memories, what's going on there, spend time with them. This sounds kind of crazy, but love them, validate them, get closer to them, or update them about what you went through and how you're in recovery now and how you're so different now. It's not that you take those exiles again. Let's picture those exiles and firefighters sitting in your chairs at the conference table. They have their stories, they have their trauma. You're not going to suddenly transform them into cheerleaders. It's the CEO saying, I hear you, I see you, I know what your role is, but let's kind of change the way you execute it. You're trying to protect me, you're trying to numb me out, you're trying to remove me from intense moments, but let me update you. I've done so much work. I have a much higher tolerance for uncomfortable feelings and experiences. So I don't need you to numb me out. I have my sponsor. I have this group of fellows that I have lunch with or do book studies with. These are all the ways I'm going to update you now to help you understand you don't need to react that way. So if you weren't being a firefighter, what would you rather be doing? What roles would you rather be doing? If you didn't need to numb me out, seek chaos, what would you be doing instead?
And the next question, which will be the last, is the managing a panic attack. And I've never had a panic attack, so I'm not going to pretend I understand. But like, I'm wondering, like, I wouldn't these tools be applicable if I'm slowing everything down and paying attention to those voices? And a panic attack to me is I'm trying to tell you that something's really, really, really bad.
Right.
And if you're reframing it and finding, I hear
Yeah. I mean,
you.
that's almost a firefighter too, right? An
Okay.
extreme response to like shut down your nervous system, or an extreme response to kind of blow up your nervous system because it's completely overwhelmed. Um, I don't specialize in acute like panic attack things, but I will say it's very accessible. I have a lot of colleagues that deal with panic attacks all the time. And so you can probably access podcasts and online websites about these really quick ways deep breathing most often, because you are trying, a panic attack is a sympathetic nervous system, an upregulation system, and we're trying to downregulate. So we're doing everything that we can to turn off the survival, fight, flight, freeze, panic attack, and turn down, down regulate those systems of I can't breathe, my heart rate's going crazy. And so it's, again, drilling in the moment, the deep breathing, the grounding techniques, the I am safe, using in order to downregulate a very regulated moment.
Great topic, great questions. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Kristin. See ya in a
Thank
couple of
you.
months.
Yeah, and I'll say just go ahead and email me if you have more questions, and I can try to like live answer them on some kind of social media.
Okay.
So try that.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.